All right.
Well, good evening, everyone. That being John and Susan. Want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us this evening. You will recall as BBC board members that I think it was back in March that we were scheduled to make a presentation to the BBC board at its regular board meeting about the LUDR update. But that very morning, our world changed. Dan was off to a COVID crisis meeting, and the process that we've been undertaking kind of stalled for a time, but we're back up and running. I'd like to take a moment to have all of us introduce ourselves, although I think most of us do know each other, but why don't we start with Robert? You're muted.
Robert. There we go. My name's Robert Ebert. Hello, John. I live in Bennington. I'm on the Planning Commission. That's about it.
Nick?
Nick Lassoff. I've been on the Planning Commission for a number of years. Trained as a landscape designer and have quite a bit of experience in planning from that too.
Ken?
Ken Swerad, Bennington, former teacher, 30 years.
Wow.
Charles?
Hi, Charles here. I've been on the Planning Commission here, I guess, 17 years probably, Mike, and next month we'll be on the DRB 20 years. So
Wow.
we're getting tired. We're getting tired of all this stuff going on. Got to blow things up a bit here.
And chair of the DRB, Charles.
And chair of the GRB.
Oh, oh my God.
John, we don't want to know who you are.
Good. Can I send a special shout out to hi everybody, but Charlie and Jen, it's great to see you. I miss having you here at the visitor center.
Oh yeah.
And Susan?
Hi, everyone. Susan Plaisance. I am the advertising manager at the Bennington Banner and the newly elected president of the BBC.
Oh wow.
Thank you. Dan, I'm sure everybody knows you as the planning director. And Catherine, could you mention who you are and what you do?
Yes. So I'm Catherine Briers. A lot of people call me Kat, and I'm a regional planner with the Bennington County Regional Commission. So I've been the primary staff person working with the Planning Commission on this. In addition, Jim Sullivan in our office has been lending some help, and we've had we've contracted our graphics development, some of it with an outside group, a guy who used to work in our office and now is a fancy consultant out in Pittsburgh, but we could reel him back in. So we represent all of that consulting work that's gone into the project.
So thank you, everyone. As I alluded to, we began this process back in 2018 and spent 2019 in developing drafts of the particular areas that we wanted to pursue with this land use and development update. And we had a primary focus right from the very beginning, and that was to incorporate or investigate, educate ourselves, and possibly incorporate the principles of form-based development in our land use development regulations. We had placed that as a goal in our previous and current town plan. And so we're responding to that particular aspect of our town plan with this particular update. We did contract with Bennington County Regional Commission and Catherine as their planning point person to guide us through and provide us with the appropriate analysis of our current document and our new draft so that we can move towards implementation, which Dan will talk about at the end of our session. An important component of this whole process was what we've deemed our stakeholders. Those people separate from the general public that we felt had a critical stake in this process of LUDR updating. We scheduled this meeting this evening to focus on our downtown stakeholders. Those would be business owners, property owners, the BBC board, and some other key targets, people who would have a specific particular voice on matters pertaining to our downtown and the areas surrounding our downtown. And it's important to note that we've kind of focused attention on the areas of our central core and those areas immediately surrounding, for specific instance, Benmont Avenue, North Street, and East Main Street, to incorporate this new way of approaching land use and development. We are going to have a second one of these sessions a week from tonight, which is geared towards an invite list of people from the general community outside of this particular downtown session that we're having this evening. So we worried and feared that there were just too many things going on right now that would allow people to focus their attention here, but I think it's important that we have John and Susan with us as the director and chair of the Better Bennington Corporation Board, and I think that'll provide us with an opportunity to filter some of this topic down to the board, which I always felt was a very important source of information for us. So having said all that, Catherine, let me ask a particular question. John and Susan, were you able to take a look at the recording of the presentation that Catherine, Dan, and I prepared earlier this week and posted?
Not yet. No, and that's a recording that I actually thought in my last conversation with you, Mike, that you and Dan were going to do after this meeting. But that's the one that you're going to want me to share with everybody?
Well, it's been shared with everybody by way of the invite to this meeting, because the link was on that invite.
Oh, okay. So the invite I sent out had a link to the, I actually sent it out thinking that that was being prepared afterward. I haven't viewed it yet.
Yes. Actually, it was kind of concurrent. We recorded it Monday morning.
Okay. All right.
So that's
I'm going to follow. I'm sorry. I'm going to follow up again after tonight's meeting with merchants. And we send out the invite, and this is the response we normally get. But people will like to view it on their own at some point. So I'm going to send that link out to the recording and let people know, view it at your leisure. You don't have to be here tonight to participate.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
And John, just a reminder, it also has a link. That same link will bring you to the draft regulations too, so they can look at the video and look at the regulations. And depending upon if we get in trouble tonight or not, this particular meeting might be on there too. So if they wanted to watch this meeting, they could do that too. We're just not sure how informative this meeting will be, but if it gets to be some good topics and good discussion, we'll make sure that gets on the link too.
And I actually have the draft up on the screen, and I see the link now at BCRCVT.
Yep.
Yes.
And so I read there was a draft, so that's why I didn't think I was sending out anything that was actually up and running yet. So that's perfect.
Yeah. It's important to note that what we're talking about, John and Susan, is a draft of what will ultimately be the proposed regulation revisions. And our hope is that we can get important input from our stakeholders as we finalize that draft and send it on through the actual process of having it adopted. So, Catherine, I think that we can play by ear the desire to have a presentation this evening. We were going to play that by ear depending on the audience, but why don't you take us through on whatever level you think would be appropriate to kind of introduce our conversation.
Sure, no problem. Let me just pull up the presentation, which is the presentation that we recorded through video. And so I think it lasted probably my portion 25 minutes or so that I went through the presentation that I'll go through really quickly now with you guys. And I'm gonna scroll this down so I can see John and Susan in particular, because I know I'm talking mostly to you two. So I believe you guys are familiar with the overall proposal of this project that the Planning Commission's been working on for over a year to integrate form-based design into the downtown area of standards. Here is that URL, John, that you were just looking up. And so this URL, if you share it with folks, has the 2 resources on it. It has that video recording of this presentation in more detail, 25 minutes worth of detail, and has the posted standards for people to look at a lot more in depth. And going through the presentation, these are the takeaways really that I wanted to highlight for people.
We've lost you, Kat.
Yep.
Yeah, if you can hear us, Catherine, you're
Frozen.
frozen.
Either that or you have an incredible skill for staying still.
Mike, can you fill the void with like some songs from your youth?
No. What I might do to fill the void is maybe get us started on one particular component. And Kat was just mentioning not only new use activities, new use regulations, but this form-based concept. John and Susan, do you have a rough sense of what we mean when we talk about form-based standards? Or would it help if we sort of put that into context for you?
I'm going to jump in real quick before Susan answers. Mike, my history of form-based standards is through BBC and many conversations with you. Susan, as our new president, is being thrown into all of this, and all of LUDR, they're all new to her.
Yeah.
She's logged in tonight to learn what it is we're talking about. So I would say a little bit of history will help.
Yes. I don't know whether Kat is back with us or not.
I
see her
am back.
materials are coming up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that actually did happen to me the other night in another Zoom. So I'm in the office intentionally to have a better internet connection, but it seems like even downtown, the internet is a little bit spotty. So I'm sorry for that. But I did catch the tail end of what you guys were talking about, that a real in-depth background is really helpful for this conversation. So I'll make sure we're getting into the background. So I was just about to go over the main takeaways, which is that these new draft regulations are designed to replace the existing regulations, the development standards for 7 zoning districts in the town center. The new regulations consolidate 3 existing zoning districts into a single zoning district. And they really try to consolidate and simplify, and where possible, loosen use restrictions within the town center. There's new form standards that have been proposed for the town center. So that's going to be in 3 new form-based design areas. One is the downtown, the second is the transitional, and the third is the neighborhood residential. And there's a bunch of new graphics that were developed as part of the form standards to help people visualize what the standards are actually communicating, because sometimes reading them in blocks of text doesn't actually communicate well what they say, especially if they're form, you can actually illustrate them. So that's what the new standards seek to do. So even just since publishing the news of the draft being available, I know Dan received at least one phone call that, you know, was effectively, what does all this mean and how does it affect me? So in addition to my initial takeaways, I've added a couple more takeaways, which is basically, even though we're talking about these as new regulations, they're really not new or additional regulations. What they are is they're taking the existing regulations and just converting them into this new format. And where possible, as part of that process, trying to loosen restrictions and regulations where it makes sense. So that's the case with the use regulations. So you can expect in the new regulations that any use restrictions of what uses are allowed are at a minimum going to be the same as the existing, and often they are less restrictive than what the current regulations are in this area. In the same way, the form regulations of what type of site development can happen, it's primarily a conversion of what's existing, and there is possibly, you could say, some additional guidance in terms of form, but it really shouldn't be anything that makes development more restricted and certainly not more costly. We know from the select board that was an early concern. They're not architectural standards that require a lot more cost for development. There's just a little bit more detailed guidance about, say, where buildings should be placed on a lot to encourage walkability and safety for new development. So land use regulations, what are they? Well, in the state of Vermont, municipalities have the right to regulate uses and development in the community. There's two things that we consider development. Development is physical development, so building new buildings, expanding existing buildings, tearing down buildings. But development is also a change in use. So if you have an existing building and it has a shop in it and you want to change it to be a residential building, that's also considered development because you're changing the use that's going on. Here's a snapshot of what some of Bennington's current regulations look like. And when we say LUDR, it's the Land Use and Development Regulations. So we'll throw out LUDR, and what we're talking about are the development regulations for Bennington. Here's a snapshot of what it looks like for Central Business District, which, if you can see my mouse, that central district right around four corners, that's the Central Business District. As the regulations currently read, you can see they're very text heavy. And the only illustration that you have in this area is the zoning map that shows you the geographic area that these regulations apply to.
Kat, could you just, for John and Susan's benefit particularly, go back and be a little more descriptive about the other zoning districts that we're focusing on?
I think I'm going to do that in just a second, Michael, if that's okay.
All right, that's fine. I just want to make sure that they were, I'm not sure they're either one. Well, Susan probably hasn't had the opportunity to be familiar with zoning maps.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'm going to address that in just a second so that it's closer to where we can talk about what the actual changes are.
Yep.
So we've already gone over that the land use plan, which has broader policies that guide development, directed the Planning Commission to undertake this project. And the project is to develop form-based standards. Why form-based standards? What are form-based standards? What form-based standards or form-based regulations do is they emphasize the form that new development takes over the specific types of uses that are allowed. Historically, planning has focused on use and segregated, physically, geographically segregated uses based on trying to limit public nuisances that would occur, noise levels, pollution, such things as part of the Industrial Revolution. But as public health codes and building codes have increasingly addressed those kinds of nuisances over time, you're actually able to have mixed uses, and mixed uses actually create the most dynamism and economic development and resilience over time. So over time, we found that moving away from regulating very specific uses in an area is advantageous, but at the same time, you do want to regulate form, because form really defines the physical built environment, which has huge impacts on how pedestrians feel safe and engage with the built environment, how inviting it is, for example, especially in your downtown, to actually bring people out on the street, to make them enjoy the streetscape and enter shops. So physical form includes things like requiring that buildings are relatively close up to the sidewalk versus really far set back, how tall the buildings are, if they're allowed to be tall, if they're required to be shorter. And a term that is used in the new regulations is glazing, and glazing refers to this type of transparent window, and there being minimum thresholds for requiring transparent windows, which have been directly linked to, again, how well pedestrians feel, how they engage, do they feel safe, do they feel like opening up their wallets and sharing what's in their wallet with a storefront. It can have it's an element of the built environment that can have a really big impact on how people feel in an area. So now this is the part where I'm going to go into these zoning districts in a little bit more detail. What you can see here is I generally talk about there being 7 of these districts in the town center. And how did we decide on this area? Well, this area is in the town's urban growth center. So the boundary for the urban growth center is larger than this, but this area is within the urban growth center, and it's specifically hugging the downtown. And really, we wanted this new approach to zoning that we're proposing to really hug and complement primarily the historic downtown. So we have 7 districts here. We have the central business district, and we've got 4 corners right here. Surrounding that is office apartment district. These are the current regulations. Going out from there, we have several districts that allow kind of mixed commercial and residential uses. Village commercial, which extends out on East Main Street and on North Street. We have the village industrial district, which is around the Energizer building. And we have the urban mixed use district, which is this northern portion of Benmont Avenue. And then we have 2 final districts that are primarily residentially oriented. So we have the MR, which is the mixed residential district here. It's again primarily residential, so you're going to find a lot of single family homes and 2-family homes, but you also can have apartments, multi-unit housing in this area, and some commercial. Village residential is really restricted to single family homes and 2-family homes. And we are proposing in this iteration that, you know, something like a corner store, a grocery store could be allowed, but that's really the most non-residential development that would be allowed. So again, this is the existing, that's 7 districts. I should address, this is POS, that's public open space. So we're actually not including that. That's like the rec center and some of these other, let's see, that's a graveyard. So we're not actually including that. It should be 7 zoning districts in the town center. So what we're proposing is consolidating this down in the spirit of simplification, consolidating it down to 5 districts. And we do that by combining 3 of the districts. Again, this is the urban mixed use along Benmont. We have village commercial around North Street, village commercial on East Main, and village industrial where the Energizer complex is. Really moving forward, the uses that the Planning Commission has settled on and imagined for these areas in the future are really pretty similar, and continuing to divide them and segregate them doesn't really seem to make sense anymore. So it's a proposal to consolidate them as a mixed use district and really have the allowed uses in that area be pretty similar moving forward. So that takes us from 7 existing zoning districts down to 5. And then complementing the use regulation is this form regulation. So as I said at the top, we have a downtown form-based area, a transitional form-based area, and the neighborhood residential. These lines are totally consistent with what the zoning districts are. So the downtown form-based area is totally corresponds to the central business zoning district. The transitional form-based area is totally consistent with the newly proposed mixed-use district and the office and apartment zoning district that's around the downtown. And the neighborhood residential form-based area is consistent with the mixed residential one and the village residential use areas. So again, I want to show you guys how we took the current regulations and really started with these to come up with the new ones. We didn't start from scratch. We really just converted what we already have and tried to make it a little bit clearer. As I said before, this mound of text can be easy to some people to read, but is not necessarily easy for a lot of people to use. But when you dive in, you can see that we have use regulation here. There's very specific uses of what's allowed, down to detail of, you know, a dry cleaner versus some other kind of retail establishment versus a personal service establishment. Then you have a really broad permitted use like a mixed use. So we realized we wanted to see if we could consolidate those down a bit. And then you do have form standards, and then you have a mix of both. So we started with these, but we paired them out into a use category and then a form category. So we're going to go first through the use standards. Here again is the geographic areas that this applies to. We have these 5 zoning districts where uses are regulated. And here's a summary table for these use permissions. We have the 5 zoning districts here. We have our consolidated use categories here. So we have residential, we have commercial, public and institutional, and manufacturing. And then you can use the matrix to identify what the use permission is to develop, say, a multifamily in the central business district. Something really useful to note with this new write-up was also that the Planning Commission wanted to help clarify what some existing standards are, but that aren't necessarily communicated really effectively in the existing regulations. So one of those points is that if there is an existing building and a person proposing a development is not going to make any serious changes, major changes to the building, they simply want to do a change of use, that that simple, relatively simple, straightforward procedure can be approved with just zoning administrator review and approval. So that's what this table communicates. However, if you look at what the ZA permission means here, it does point out that for any new structures or substantial expansions in an area, even if it says ZA, the new construction or substantial expansion does require development review board review and approval. So again, the development review board is a citizen board that reviews development proposals. So so we hope that that is a little bit clearer to reference here, because that wasn't made very clear in the existing standards. So going on with what the different levels of permission are, I've described ZA. There's a fairly straightforward review process that's considered administrative that the zoning administrator does. If something is new construction or is a more significant change, or for some reason the Planning Commission here has recommended that even if it's not new construction, even if it's reuse of an existing building, if you want to do a residential care facility in the mixed use district, even if you're reusing an existing building, the Development Review Board really wants to have some oversight into how that site is developed to be permitted. You can also say not permitted. So you can find examples where single and 2-family homes are not permitted in the central business district. Finally, something to note here is that areas that have a plus sign by them, they have additional use standards to be referenced. So say I want to build a multifamily home in the central business district, I can see that there are some additional use standards that apply. So to go and understand what those are, I go to the following tables, table 3.2, and I read that to develop a multifamily home in the central business district, ground floor dwelling units are not permitted to front on South Street, North Street, and Main Street. All right, so if that was something I was proposing, I can see now that I cannot do that on Main Street like I wanted, but I would be able to do that on another street, have ground floor unit residences. There's a lot more background here, a lot more detail that folks can get into. Again, you know, we always have to strike this balance with this presentation of giving you enough information to understand and not enough to bore you to death. What you can see though with this summary is they have been color coded, so they give you at a glance an idea of what form-based standards you need to reference for each of these areas. And this color coding is consistent with the maps, the form-based maps, and the sections of standards. So you can use those color codes. Here's the rest of those additional use requirements. So we looked previously at multifamily dwelling development in the central business district, but we have the rest of those for the remaining 4 districts. We have central business, mixed use, office and apartment, mixed residential 1, and village residential that you would reference if they have additional standards that apply. I've mentioned that we consolidated the uses when we first did a survey of how many use categories, individual uses were regulated in the town center. It was about 47 individual uses that were regulated. We've consolidated those down to just 14 categories. And the point of categorizing them is really the whole point of regulating a use is when there are pretty predictable impacts that a certain type of use can have that you might have a concern about. So a certain noise level that a type of use can generate, or a pollution level, or whatever it is, or a lighting level. And so you want to flag that type of use to know that you need to think about that area of concern. When you group these down though, then you get to group several types of uses under a category that it's already flagged by the category what types of concerns you might have. So for a gas station, you're going to be really concerned about traffic flow in and out because you have a lot of cars going in and out of that area. So all of these uses are going to have that similar concern level. So in formatting the regulations, this is just much more consolidated, simplified, and easy to navigate than talking about each and every one of these uses for each zoning district. So that was a quick overview of the new proposals for uses. Now we're moving on to the form standards. And again, here's the geographic areas. We have proposed a downtown, a transitional form area, and neighborhood residential form area. For starting with the downtown, we start with each of these areas talking generally about area principles and characteristics. And this is really helpful when we do have an instance of development review board that's required for some development. There's a fit with the character of the neighborhood criteria that the DRB can rely on. So this helps kind of spell out what some of those criteria are. For example, this form area should have high density and pedestrian oriented development, varied building structure and character, dynamic sidewalks and storefronts, lots of green spaces and parks, multiple stories and active rooftops, and green stormwater management. And you can see that the standards are formatted so that individual standards that are, maybe helpful to illustrate are called out and labeled. So for example, we can see A is an indication that connectivity throughout the town center for pedestrians by way of sidewalks and other pathways is important. So we have here indicated kind of an alleyway that is understood to probably take these folks on the sidewalks out to a rear parking lot, because parking lots are not permitted to front directly on main streets in the downtown. So those types of connectors are going to be really important in the downtown. Then we move on to building and parking placement and the types of the types of standard categories that are really important here include lot sizes and lot coverage, building frontage, setbacks, what types of yards are allowed in front of a building, and plenty of parking direction. Something important here to note is this term frontage. A lot of people are not familiar with what frontage is, but frontage is the percentage of a lot line, a front lot line, the percent of that lot line that has to be covered with building. So you can see here that at Main Street, we're requiring 100% lot frontage. So that means this lot line needs to be covered 100%, be met with this building. So you can see all of these buildings here, for example, comply with that. Now, once we get off of Main Street and we're on a side street, that drops down to 60%. So you can see an illustration here of what 60% lot frontage looks like in comparison. And what's the point of this regulation? It really is to create a nice, dense downtown that people enjoy walking through. They feel it's like a little bit urban. It's very exciting. They don't have to walk too far to get among several different storefronts or you know, the walk up to their apartment where they live. That's a really good way to encourage the dense type of development we want in this area. So now moving on to building form, we have criteria like building height, encroachments into the right-of-way, such as balconies and awnings. And we did outline some municipal standards for the public right-of-way and amenities like sidewalks, street trees, and street furniture. In addition, I mentioned glazing before, so we've called out minimum thresholds for glazing in different areas, and we break it down by if you're on Main Street versus on a side street, if you're the first floor of the building or upper stories. You can see those minimum thresholds here, and our graphics designer, they're indicated here, but sometimes the glazing that's indicated is exactly what the minimum threshold is, and sometimes it's above it. Because with all of these, with it being a minimum threshold, you can always have more glazing than the minimum, but we want to make sure that there's a minimum glazing that the buildings do have. So that was the downtown. That's the first of the 3 form areas. And this next one is transitional. Again, beginning with area principles and characteristics, we've moved down slightly to medium to high density development. So it's not quite as dense as the downtown, but we still have complete streets that are accommodating all kinds of users, not just motor vehicles, but also pedestrians and cyclists. These areas do tend to follow kind of the gateway areas into the downtown. So Benmont Avenue, Main Street, and North Street. So we really want traffic to be flowing very safely and effectively through these areas. Building parking and placement. Again, we've got building lot sizes, their frontage, setbacks from the lot lines, what can be in people's yards, what types of yards are allowed, parking regulations. And let's see, an important takeaway here, I had identified something. Yes, for this form-based area, something that the Planning Commission did decide to retain from the existing regulations is that even though this is one form-based design area, they decided it was important to retain some different setbacks by use district. So you can see here that for the mixed use district, there is you're allowed to build buildings up to the lot line, whereas an office apartment, to distinguish it from the downtown, there is a minimum 10-foot setback. So those are the kind of details that that you want to pay attention to, but that hopefully these graphics help illustrate so that you don't feel like you have to quite dig through all of this text to get at those kind of details. And for the transitional area, again, we have building form, building height, the encroachments, the public realm amenities, and glazing you can see over here. Again, we have some distinctions in form between the mixed use district and the OA. So for example, in the mixed use area, 1-story buildings are permitted, but they do have to meet some minimum roof pitch requirements. In the OA, it is a minimum of 2 functional stories. So you can see that here. Yeah, that's the transitional area. And so the final form-based area is the neighborhood residential area. Characteristics include compact, walkable development in these areas. So not super high density, but you still want a level of density that makes it so folks can reasonably walk from point A to point B, and they feel like there's a safe neighborhood quality to the area. Streets, again, serve a lot of users safely. There's green spaces and trees. Importantly, porches and pedestrian paths are encouraged, again, to make people feel safe and like this is a walkable area. Really, there's a large emphasis on infill housing being developed in this area that stays consistent with the existing settlement pattern, but can hopefully fit in additional housing units efficiently. You can see as these graphics, it's really nice when you can look at them all in a document together. You go through the series of them and you can see how density is increasing when you actually see what these setbacks and lot coverages look like in practice. You can really see how density scales down through these areas. So that's one of the intentions with these graphics, is that it can really help people see what do these regulations do in practice. So glancing through these and comparing them to the other graphics, you should be able to see that we have a lot more green space between buildings, but we're still relatively densely settled in this area. Minimum lot sizes and frontages, setbacks, parking, similar to everywhere else. I will call attention to the fact that because we're encouraging accessory dwelling units and accessory apartments to be developed in this area, while there are some standards, some regulations on density and setbacks, there are some notable exceptions that are made for ADUs. So for example, with this label D, we can see it corresponds to this label down here for accessory structures totaling less than 100 square feet. So these are really small economy apartments that we're talking about. They can have a reduced minimum side and rear setback of just 5 feet, whereas in the rest of the area, all other buildings, it's a minimum of a 10-foot setback. So again, this is intended to really encourage people to identify opportunities for that infill development. So you want to keep an eye out for where there are those kinds of exceptions for accessory dwelling units.
Oh. Okay.
And onto the final section, building form for neighborhood residential. We have again, you know, these height indications. There's no minimum story. There's a 35-foot max, which I believe is pretty consistent with the existing regulations, as a lot of these are. You do want to pay attention that we have noted where single and two-family dwellings are often exempt from certain kinds of form regulations. So you can look throughout the regulations in this section and see that for a lot of things, they're going to apply primarily to multifamily dwellings. And if there's you know, an opportunity to develop, say, a corner store, it would apply to those developments. And so that's it. Those, when you look, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just had all of your screens go black, but if you can hear me, we're good. So those are all of the standards. If you look at them online, that's the full packet. Again, the takeaways to go through really quickly, the regulations we've just gone through are designed to take the place of the standards for 7 existing zoning districts. We're consolidating the zoning districts just slightly. It's really not a major change in practice from 7 to 5 zoning districts. The use categories have been consolidated quite a bit more. What that means in practice is not that uses are more restrictive. Really, they are less restrictive than the existing regulations. There's new form standards, 3 new form-based design areas in the town center that have graphics and illustrations that hopefully make them a little bit more digestible and understandable to your average citizen. And so this is when I pass it off to Dan if he wants to talk about next steps, or we can just talk about any questions that John or Susan have.
So I think be most efficient at this time just to see if we have questions, and at the end of the meeting I can certainly talk about the next steps in the adoption process, but I know that's not exciting stuff, so let's see if there's any questions.
I'm just soaking all this in. I have no questions right now. I'm going to review it again, and I will get with you if I have questions, if that's okay.
That sounds great. And what I would suggest is I would be happy to meet with you, or maybe you could talk to Michael. And Michael, you and Catherine and I could meet if that makes sense. But we do want to get your input, and we'd be happy to make an accommodation for that.
Thank you.
Catherine, can you drop the slide so we can again see each other?
Mhm.
Great, thanks.
There we go.
Wonderful. But John, would that be the same with you? Did you come tonight with any particular things on your mind relative to what we're doing here?
No, but all that changed during the presentation. And I'll start with an apology. It's like one thing that drives me crazy is when somebody walks in after all the work is done and then starts asking questions that should have been asked on before it all started. But the overall picture is these changes are being made for a reason. And if this is something we want to share with the community and get them to be able to wrap their mind around, two things is to somehow highlight the changes that were made based on requests or complaints or comments or whatever, and explain why the changes are being made. And two, reading it, it's going to the layperson, it's a bunch of, I have no idea what this even means. I just know how it's going to affect me in the long run. And me being on the street, speaking with business owners who are usually told things by the property owners that isn't necessarily always true. And what I hear, and I've heard 3 times in the last week, is, oh yeah, they want to fix the front of my building, but the town won't let them. And I'm always like, that's rarely true. The town will always let you fix the building, but sometimes a landlord will say that because they don't want to do it and they blame the town, or they don't understand why the town is asking them for restrictions. All that being said, that's to me the big picture. I have a million little questions, but I think instead of making you sit through it now, like I wish John was here in the beginning asking these questions, is there a way for me just to email them to you all and say, here are thoughts I had with what you're bringing up?
I do think that would be a good idea, John, or Dan and I can sit down with you. We'd be very happy to do that. I would also want to point out that this is the beginning of this part of the process.
The public part.
You haven't ignored what's been going on because the process up until now has been internal. We felt that it would be more, excuse me, practical for us to develop a framework of elements that we wanted to pursue rather than just throw out the question, what do you think is good or bad or neutral about planning and zoning in Bennington?
Okay, then I will either meet with you guys anytime or email the questions I just had from just the quick presentation. And I think if I went through it, I'd probably have another 1,000 questions. But one thing I'll throw out, just because it's you guys, one comment I heard in the street, which I had no idea, was, John, your email said the public presentation was September 3rd. That's not even 2 weeks away. Aren't we supposed to be notified more in advance of that? And I'm like, I don't know. So I'm just throwing that out to you guys.
That's John. That's just a stakeholder meeting. That's not a public, adoption or hearing meeting. So it's just.
Wasn't tonight's listed as the stakeholder and public input on September 3rd?
Yes, but Dan, I think this would be a good idea for you to go through the process.
Yeah, let me do that.
Yeah.
So John, what we're doing now are just informal stakeholder input meetings. Either this one's focused on the downtown, the next one's focused townwide, whoever wants to. We're asking the chamber to send out a notice, which they did.
All right.
But these are not the formal hearings that are required in order to adopt these regulations. That will come after. So after these stakeholder meetings, we'll take whatever input we get, incorporate it in the draft, and develop a public hearing draft that we will then start to go through the formal process, although we'll probably still have more informal process before that. We'll probably want to meet with the select board, maybe other organizations we want to meet with. But the formal process will have those formal notices in the banner. We'll have a formal meeting before the Planning Commission, and there'll be at least a couple meetings at the Select Board as well before anything is adopted. But we're hoping that we can get a lot of input before that process begins, so that we have something that takes into account the concerns that folks may have as we move forward.
I'm glad I brought that up. That makes everything a lot more clarified. And the person that even brought this up to me is going to appreciate hearing that as an answer.
Yeah. No,
And it was said in a very positive way.
We're not in any way ready to have public hearings, the formal public hearings. We are ready to take input, which is what we're trying to do now.
And I would just add that that's why we decided to go. It's so challenging at the moment with COVID and the restrictions, that the normal ways of communicating with people are so difficult. That's why we posted the video, because, even seeing the attendance tonight, not a lot of people can make it or know about it, but that's why the full presentation, which is pretty consistent with what I just did for you guys now, that's what the recording is online. So people can watch it in their own time. They can go through the posted standards, again, in their own time, consistent, simultaneously with the presentation, or just do the presentation, get the overview, then dive in and follow up with all their comments. And there's not a deadline. I think Dan was saying this, but just to hammer it home, we don't know when this is going to be ready to go to the public hearing adoption process. If we get a lot of input right now, then it's going to be the time that it takes to get all of that input in before this is ready to get to that stage.
Kat, and since the presentation that you just went through right now is public, again, are they going to be able to see like tonight's meeting?
We can also do that. Yep.
Yep.
We are recording it, so we can post that.
That's much better, because that's a lot of technical information that they'll just glaze over. But being able to listen to you talk and the answer Dan just gave, I think is going to help a lot of people. And I think a lot of people will view this a lot more comfortably than going through that by themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, although the presentation that was recorded and is now posted was essentially the presentation that Catherine made tonight.
Yeah, virtually identical.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So
I apologize for not reviewing it.
no,
before next meeting.
that's fine. It allows us to kind of cover the base twice. And the explanations that Dan gave tonight are also in the original video in terms of process and timeline.
But let me say that if you are going to recommend a single video, maybe go ahead and recommend this conversation, because not only are you on the screen and people know you, but as I mentioned at the beginning, Dan did receive, at least one question this week since the article and the banner appeared, that I did add. What's a substantial change is that I added some of those clarifying points, which is the basic question of what's changing. And with some of the other language that we've been using, we say a lot of new, these new standards, which they are new and that they've been developed and they look very new. But the take home point that primarily they're converting what's existing and then loosening restrictions. That I hope is clearer from this conversation than it is in that first presentation.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
John, if I might, and Susan, I want to mention something that we have talked about within the context of the Better Bennington Corporation. And we have a long history of understanding the roles of certain areas, streets, thoroughfares, entrance points to our downtown. And we have planning documents developed by the Better Bennington Corporation that have also spoken to those issues. I want to mention, not necessarily for discussion tonight, but perhaps to highlight a particular aspect of the update that the Better Bennington Corporation might have a particular interest in. The first is the concept of simplifying our zoning districts, and in particular the three that have become one. The Village Commercial on East Main Street, the Village Commercial on North Street, and the mixed use area on Binmont Avenue. And as Kat had mentioned, those three are now being combined into one zoning district. They have special use standards that apply specifically to Benmont or North Street or East Main Street. But that, from the perspective of downtown, that could be perceived as a change. And of course, we all know that we have talked extensively, we being the BBC, about the role of North Street in downtown, and to a lesser extent, the role of East Main Street as an approach to downtown. So I wanted to point that out, and that might be a point for further conversation that we might want to have with you or with the BBC. The second one is an incredibly important issue, and that is the likelihood of the Eveready building becoming a development opportunity. We have, for all intents and purposes, eliminated the industrial zone, which was defined by Eveready, and have included Eveready in the mixed use area. I think it's important for us to highlight that Eveready is an opportunity in the waiting because of its proximity to the downtown. It's bordering the tallest building, bordering on the Walloon-Sac, and the amount of space that is potentially going to come available for mixed-use occupancy. So I think that that's an important part of our future, and we want to be ready for it. We don't want to have to reinvent the wheel when suddenly we have a vacant building standing vacant for a long period of time. To a certain extent, that applies also to what's going on at Ben High right now and the redevelopment of that building. And forgive me, Commission, for talking about something that is wrapped up in the BBC specifically, and that's the issue, and Dan and I have touched on this, the issue of the office apartment zone, which Ben High is currently located in, versus the central business district, which the office apartment zone borders. And we've had this discussion in the past about whether Ben High should be in the central business district because of the potential mixed use availability there, or whether it should stay separate from the central business district and part of and be part of the OA.
Mike,
so I think that, I'm sorry?
If I can jump in, I'm glad you brought that up, because the one, if I was allowed one question tonight, it would be, is there a growth provision? Let's say the central business district is maxed out. And I'm bringing this up because I've given two groups tours in the last week. I'm like, here's your option, here's your option, here's your option. That's it. And then with like the garlic event, we're doing some parking at the the middle school. And I'm like, boy, that really feels like it's not part of downtown anymore. Let's say the central business district is completely developed, and our goal is to create more of a walkable central business district, because the development is expanding, and downtown it continues to grow and expand. Has that been discussed? And maybe is there a way for the central business district standards to expand?
I'll take a stab, but I would welcome any of the commission members to jump in. I think it's fair to say that we have not specifically said if we want to grow the central business district, which, by the way, we're not going to call the central business district anymore. It's an archaic term. There's a whole lot more going on there than business. That's an interesting question that you raised, John. We think, I would hazard to say comfortably, that we have this core of our community, which is our downtown, and it is shaped and formed by revolving elements of less density, greater residential activity, and it's an interesting question for the future. What would we want to give up in terms of the office department zone or the mixed use zones to expand the downtown? Should development require that in the future? I would ask anyone else to comment on that. That's certainly not something that we want to tackle and answer tonight, but it's an interesting point that you raised.
Well, if I understand the question, John, you're asking if there wasn't any more room in the, let's call it the central business district for now, but
Yeah.
where would we
I'm
expand?
sorry I'm using that term. Yeah.
Yeah. But the bottom line is right now we probably have at least 15 years of development in the downtown that before we even have to think about being built out. We have the rest of the
Yeah.
Putnam block. We have the Tuttle site. We have, the vacant space in front of the old Catamount School. There's just this vacant land all over the place. There's parking lots that probably should be converted to buildings. So yeah, it may be fun to talk about where do we expand next, but I'm more worried about what we're going to do in the next 15 years, I guess. And that's just a personal position.
And
Sure.
it makes me think also another way to look at this, the state, as we know, has gone to taken great strides to incentivize dense development within that downtown core. And the last thing that we would probably want to do would be to expand the incentive potential when we haven't used up the opportunities that Dan is referencing. So it's a little cart and horse thing there, but we want the downtown incentives to revolve around Putnam Square to make that the core success area of the community.
In a couple of things, and I know Dan, you addressed this, like the Tuttle lot or the lawn in front of the Catamount School. As we're building more and more residential downtown, and the demand is growing, obviously, and BBC Design Committee is focused on this. It's not always about the construction as far as development, but creating a very attractive living space, which a lot of time is just green space, the parks and even a dog park or whatever. And I'm just hoping that our design standards always include that undeveloped space as being just as important. I know it's a bitter pill to swallow as far as the municipality goes, because it's not on the tax roll, but boy, people calling now looking to move here and looking for apartments, and it's sure nice to say, yeah, we have a splash pad on the way and fountains and dining areas and entertainment spaces. Those are the things that people are like, oh, really? Within walking distance. So as far as the planning goes, I hope that those places hold almost as much important as development and getting these places on the tax roll, which I know is just as important as well.
Yeah, if you look at the principles in the green space and then active, attractive public realm is a high priority.
Good. All right.
And John, if I could hop in, I just thought, I know the first question that you asked was a little bit more of a big picture question, like a philosophical question of, how are we thinking about the downtown and future expansion? But to bring it to the proposed standards, I would just direct you to look at the provisions, because it is part of what zoning and land use regulations are intended to be. Michael brought up that there are incentives from the state through the designation program to prioritize development within the downtown boundary as opposed to even just outside of it. You just cross a line on a map and you don't have the same types of incentives. In that same way, you can't deny that that's effectively what some aspects of the land use regulations do. And the way that they do it is by allowing a use in one area that you don't allow in another area, because you're trying to direct that use to the downtown. So I would ask you to look, and I know they can be a little bit dense and sometimes you don't know what you're looking at, but if you look at the regulations and go item by item, actually, if you don't mind me pulling it up, just so I'm not unclear about what I'm referring to, if you guys just give me a second. When you look at, sorry, my little Zoom window's in the way of my presentation starter. So when you look, come on. When you look at, for example, this table, you can actually see here what is allowed, what is basically being incentivized and de-incentivized when you cross the line between the central business district versus, you know, the transitional area and the mixed use district. So if you have thoughts about what should be encouraged in the central district as opposed to the immediately surrounding area, this is where that is actually spelled out. And if you disagree with it and have a different perspective on, you know, whether gas stations should be allowed in the central business district, I imagine you already have some feelings about that, but that's where, see, we're disincentivizing it here and pushing it out to these other areas. So just wanted to bring it back to the standards.
And thank you. And one more and then I'm done, and I'm sorry. In the standards, new construction versus existing properties, especially ones that have always kind of been like this hanging issue, or what I think is going to be an issue pretty soon. Right outside of the core, things like Catamount Glass Factory, and then that ever hanging empty property that the museum owns just outside of the core district also. Is there any provision for those properties to somehow come back online, even though they're outside of the design?
Well, so John, if they're not changing the structure, if they're not tearing it down or rebuilding a new, they're existing and they can continue. So from the form-based standpoint.
Oh, okay. Okay, and I won't get into it. I'll do that in emails, but
Okay.
thank you. Those are thoughts that they've always kind of just been hanging there ever since I've been here.
I know that was one of the things that some of the folks or at least one of the persons I talked to was real worried about. Oh, but my building currently doesn't comply. Actually, it did, but they thought it didn't. We're not going to, you don't have to change anything if it's an existing structure. Even if you put a new use in there, it's very clear in our regulations, existing structure, we're not going to impose these on you. Yeah, if you want to do a substantial addition, we want that to look the way it should under the standards. But as far as your existing structure, maintaining it, painting it, keeping it clean, that's, you know, none of that's going to trigger anything.
John, as you're looking at the proposals, there are provisions in the office apartment which differentiate between, and now I'm talking about new construction or substantial expansion, that differentiate between properties that in the office apartment that front on West Main Street and office apartment areas that are on, for instance, Elm Street. So there are different approaches in those two areas that recognize the high volume traffic area that is West Main Street versus the still substantial residential area that is Elm Street. So I think those kinds of things are accommodated, but it's also incredibly important that we all kind of talk through and share those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that we unearth little glitches in our thought process.
Cool.
Would there be any other commission members that would comment on any of the points that John has raised? Okay, all right. I want to ask a question, John. We're not to our curfew yet, although I would advise that I'm not going to try and get us there. But given that we have John and Susan here this evening, maybe think about this, John. How can we continue to reach out to the downtown community. Yes, we want to encourage them to read the available information that they can online, but I still think there's value in our having face-to-face. Maybe Zoom isn't the answer. Maybe we've got to narrow down to more one-on-one or one-on-two conversations with people that are really important to this process. And I'm not trying to say that some people are less important than others, but you know what I mean. Significant property owners, whoever they might be. Think about how we might move forward from this evening as we progress through the process.
A little bit. I did a bad job, I think, inviting people for what it was, and I don't think I actually knew that we're still at the stakeholder planning stage, as opposed to here are the new regulations.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Had I known that, I could have answered that comment and probably had 2 or 3 more people participating tonight.
Yeah.
The reason you're being notified is your input at ground level, as opposed to here's the way the world is going to be going forward. Since there's more opportunity on September 3rd, I'll make sure I send this back out, and with a link to tonight's meeting, or that again, saying, and here's a little bring you up to speed information, and you can sit and listen if that's all you want to do to the next meeting, or come up with the questions now, and there'll be an opportunity to ask. I think that might trigger a little more comfort of people easing into the process. You can watch and participate if you want, or not. And you're being invited because of your expertise, not because you're just a resident, and meaning a downtown business owner or a downtown resident.
Yeah.
You had asked, who are we missing downtown? And our emails don't include renters or homeowners downtown. It's mostly the people that own the business properties.
Yep.
And these are the questions that are brought up all the time, and I want to make sure property managers are included, which I know they weren't, but I can do a much better job. I want to say before September 3rd, but I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah,
but
that's not a deadline for us.
excellent. Then
yeah,
the property managers like Skeeter, John Hale, all of those guys that should know every little detail,
yeah,
or have say, feel like they had some say in it.
Yeah.
So I'll do a better job.
It's understood, has always been understood, that from a strictly zoning standpoint, people are only interested in zoning when A, it prevents them from doing something to their property, or B, it allows something next to their property.
Yep.
And that's when they get interested in zoning.
And maybe I'll use that as a tagline, like, what is it my neighbor got away with that I couldn't do? Or how come the town says no to everything?
Yeah.
Because I hear that constantly. Half the time I know that property owners are making it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so John,
does that bring us to a point, Dan?
Well, I think it does, but I just want to mention to John, if those folks are saying that to you, give them my phone number. Probably 90% of the time, I don't even know what they're talking about because no one's ever reached out to me. It's just a knee jerk from a property owner or somebody else. So.
Oh, it's not, and I know it is. It's not the property owner, it's the business owner. Well, the landowner told me he can't do this because the town won't let him. And I look at him, I'm like, what do you mean the town won't let them? Of course the town won't let them unless they're looking to put up like pink balloons for their facade. Of course the town won't let them. And I always say they're telling you that because they don't want to make the investment, or they're not interested in doing it.
Right.
But I always say, don't ever let the landlord tell you that. Go back and be like, what exactly did the town not let you do?
I have a question, and I should know the answer to this. Have we provided an alternative way for people to interact with the commission if they can't make one of these meetings? Do we have some kind of central email or something that they can communicate to?
But
Oh,
that
that's
would currently be on the website where the information is posted on BCRC's website would just be Dan's email and phone number.
Okay.
But maybe we should, as John is talking around town, and maybe we should be more explicit that you don't have to be on Zoom to participate in the process.
right.
Your keyboard will get you into the process. And we should figure out a way to make that point.
You could, on the town's website under DRB, instead of just having Dan's email, if you titled it Portal to Design Development Review, and even if it just goes to Dan, let the public think this is how I can put my comments in, and I'm not complaining to Dan or addressing it to Dan, or Dan's the one who told me I couldn't do it. Just a portal to participate and let them figure out how their input's getting processed.
Yeah, we can talk about that, but I think the best way is to put it all on the BCRC website where all the video and the
Oh yeah,
standards
yeah,
live. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep.
And Kat, what did you say on your website? A place for input, or there is a place for input?
You're muted. Yep.
Yep, all that's there now. Hold on, I had it up earlier. I was looking at it. All I have now is questions, contact Dan Marks, and there's his email and his phone.
All right.
I think we can expand on that language and we can
Yep.
talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, that might bring us to a conclusion point, and I want to thank John and Susan. If there were two people that we wanted to have here tonight, you were them, from the standpoint of your leadership roles vis-a-vis downtown. So thank you very much for taking the time, and I hope that we've piqued your interest.
I thought you were going to tell me you wanted me here for my big mouth, Mike.
Well, that's a less polite way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you didn't get to enjoy it enough, Susan. Come on, give it out. Show what you can do.
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. She wants to pick her spots. Dan, you had mentioned that there were a couple of other items that you wanted to maybe run by the commission that weren't necessarily pertinent to tonight's topic. If that's the case, I would say that Susan and John, you don't have to hang around any longer if we're just going to get into some gritty, wonky planning commission stuff. Dan, what was your thought there?
Well, and this maybe it'd be helpful for John and Susan to hear.
Okay.
I do think that we do have to make, at least you and I, and hopefully with the help of the commission, I think we have to make some strategic reach outs to individuals and or groups that we can talk to, so they'll feel that they understand, so we can explain what we're trying to accomplish. It's really hard. I mean, Catherine did a great job on that video, but you know, how many people, I don't know how many people actually watch the video, and sometimes we just have to go to them and spoon feed it. And I'm happy to do that. And I think I think once we do that for folks, they'll realize, oh yeah, I see why you're doing this. That we're not trying to make things more difficult. We're not trying to be obstructionist. And in fact, our effort has always been to try to make things a little bit clearer, hopefully a little bit easier. And I know that we have to reach out to everyone, but I think the people that most need to understand this are the folks that are most likely to make an investment in our town. And this is what we expect when you do that. And we're trying to facilitate that as much as possible. So that's all I had to say. We can talk about that at a future commission meeting.
Yeah, but we certainly have the opportunity to step out of Zoom.
Yes.
For those kind of targeted conversations.
Yes.
So John, keep that in mind as you're reaching out.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody Robert, it was nice to see you again. Kat, thank you for everything. And thanks, Mike, for the invite and Dan for the invite.
Thank you.
Good night,
Same here. Good night,
Bye,
everybody.
John.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
All right, Michael,
So,
does that wrap us up?
Yeah, I think it does. I was just gonna ask if an adjournment is warranted on everybody's part. Does anyone else have anything else to say or offer at this point?
Yeah, just one question real quick. Is the BBC board, are they still meeting monthly, like on Zoom or anything? Are they meeting at all?
We have begun doing that. We have met twice since the COVID restrictions shut us down.
Can
So
we crash one of their Zoom meetings? I mean, when they're all together on Zoom anyway, can we do this?
Well, we were going to do that in person back in March.
I know.
Yeah. So, yeah, we can think about that. Let's talk to John and Susan
Yeah.
about that. I still think that the BBC board is an important constituency here. Now, the reality is what Dan was just saying, they're not the movers and shakers,
Right.
by and large. So sitting down on screen with the BBC board, I still think has value to it.
Yeah.
So Robert, thank you for
Yeah.
mentioning that.
Because they disseminate information.
Yes,
They may
Yeah.
not be the movers and shakers, but they can help get the word out to others. So anyway,
that's right. Yeah, yeah. They're in storefronts. They're
right.
they're in other circles that are important to this process. Yes.
Great.
Let's see what we can do with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it'd be great, Michael, since at the next board meeting, if you could urge all the board members to watch the video at least.
Yeah.
So you have a basic understanding of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll plug Susan and John to do that.
Yeah.
Because I might not be the right face to tell them to get on with looking at our stuff.
I get it.
Mike, you realize that you're being recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't stop recording. It's still going.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Well, thanks,
All right,
everybody.
well,
All right.
in danger of saying anything else we shouldn't say. Thank you, everyone. We'll
Thank you.
carry on from here.
Great. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Kathy.
Good night.
Yep, thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.